the storm raged over the Netherlands, a tempest of change that threatened to sweep away centuries of tradition. In the heart of this turmoil stood a young pastor, Hendrik Scholte, whose life was about to change forever. It was 1834, and the Netherlands was in the grip of a new political and religious order. The old ways, the ways of the Dutch Reformed Church, were being challenged by the winds of the Enlightenment. But Scholte, a man of deep faith and a product of the University of Leiden, felt a growing unease. He knew that something was amiss, that the soul of his country was at stake. Scholte's concerns were not unique. Across the Netherlands, other intellectuals and religious leaders were also grappling with the same questions. One of them was Nicolas Schotsman, a pastor in Leiden. Schotsman, a man of profound conviction, had been influenced by the Réveil, a spiritual revival that had swept through Geneva in the early 19th century, thanks to the teachings of Robert Haldane. In 1819, on the bicentennial of the Synod of Dort, Schotsman published 2 sermons that reaffirmed the orthodox theology of the 17th century Dutch churches. His sermons were a call to return to the roots of Dutch Reformed faith, a plea to resist the new political and religious changes that were reshaping the nation. Schotsman's bold stance did not go unnoticed. The enlightened defenders of the new order were quick to criticize him, but their attacks only served to rally others to his cause. One of those supporters was Willem Malverdijk, a renowned Dutch poet and theologian. Bilderdijk, who directed a theological school in Leiden, saw in Schotsman's sermons a defense of the traditional Reformed faith that he believed was essential to Dutch society. For Bilderdijk, traditional Reformed Protestantism was not just a religion. It was a bulwark against the rationalism, utilitarianism, and revolutionary ideology that threatened to undermine the very fabric of Dutch life. Bilderdijk's defense of Schotsman drew a following, including some of the most influential figures of the time. Guillaume Groen van Prinsterer, a secretary of the cabinet and a member of parliament, was among those who joined the cause. So was Isaac de Costa, a Jewish poet who had converted to Protestantism while studying in Leiden, and Abraham Kuyper, a physician who had also converted from his ancestral Jewish faith. These men met privately for Bible study, devotion, and reflection on the state of Dutch society. They were a small but determined group, united in their belief that the old ways were worth preserving. However, their opposition to the Enlightenment was not without its costs. Kuyper, for example, wrote pamphlets opposing vaccinations, a medical discovery that had emerged during the French Revolution. His arguments were met with fierce criticism from the medical community, who saw his stance as a threat to public health. Despite the backlash, Kuyper and his fellow believers remained steadfast in their conviction that the new ideas were rooted in anti-Christian philosophy. King William I, the ruler of the Netherlands, found the arguments of Bilderdijk and his followers both useful and problematic. On one hand, their defense of traditional Reformed Protestantism and the divine right theory of monarchy aligned with his own views. On the other hand, he was wary of alienating the Belgians, who were already restless under Dutch rule. The king's ambivalence reflected the broader tensions in Dutch society, where the forces of tradition and modernity were locked in a struggle for the soul of the nation. Meanwhile, the Réveil Circle, while influential, was not as radical as the Seceders, a group of Reformed Protestants who had decided to break away from the national church. The Seceders, led by figures like Hendrik de Kock, were driven by a deep sense of conviction that the new ecclesiastical order had compromised the integrity of the Reformed faith. Their decision to form a separate church was a bold and controversial move, one that drew both support and criticism from within the Reformed community. One of the most vocal supporters of the Seceders was Groen van Prinsterer. In 1837, he wrote a memorandum to the king, arguing that the legal penalties imposed on the Yezidis were unconstitutional. While he did not condone their methods, he believed that they had a valid point about the new church constitution and its potential for abuse. Rohn's defense of the Yezidis' rights under the law helped to bring their cause to the attention of a wider audience. As the debate over the Yezidis raged on, the Reveille Circle continued to work within the established institutions of the Dutch Church. They petitioned for stricter rules governing subscription and ordination, hoping to restore traditional standards. However, their efforts met with limited success. The greatest change came in 1852, when the king granted the state church independence to govern its own affairs. This move, while significant, did little to address the underlying issues that had led to the afscheiding, the great separation of the Yezidis. The rise of a conservative Reformed faction within Dutch Protestantism was a complex and multifaceted phenomenon. It was a movement that drew from deep wells of tradition and was fueled by a strong sense of national identity. But it was also a movement that was open to new ideas and innovations, particularly those coming from pietistic and millenarian Protestantism in other parts of Europe. The lack of a single unifying voice or institution builder meant that the movement remained fragmented, with different groups and leaders pursuing their own paths. In the midst of this turmoil, a young man named Abraham Kuyper was about to emerge as a powerful force in Dutch society. Born in 1837, Kuyper was the son of a moderately Orthodox minister in the National Church. His early life was marked by a spiritual journey that would lead him to become one of the most influential figures in Dutch Reformed Protestantism. But that is a story for another chapter. For now, the storm raged on, and the future of the Netherlands hung in the balance. Abraham Kuyper was a man of many hats: journalist, politician, theologian, and church leader. His opening address in the Netherlands was a key to understanding his vision and goals. The main theme was sovereignty, a concept that was crucial in the post-Napoleonic era of the Netherlands. Kuyper's message was complex, often seeming to have a double meaning. On one hand, he strongly believed in the lordship of Christ over every aspect of life, and he viewed the crisis of liberal society as a rebellion against Christ. He criticized the idea of the state becoming an all-powerful God, a concept he linked to the philosopher Hegel's idea of the state as a divine entity. However, Kuyper's response to this tyranny wasn't to create a Christian version of the same problem. Instead, he introduced the idea of sphere sovereignty. This meant that Christ's authority was divided into different spheres of life, such as morality, science, business, and art. Each sphere had its own domain and authority, which protected individuals and institutions from the overreach of the state. This concept was especially important for Kuyper's vision of a diverse and free society in the Netherlands, where reformed institutions could operate according to their own religious norms without state interference. One of the most significant tests of Kuyper's theory was in education. He believed that private schools should have the freedom to teach according to their own beliefs, which was a direct challenge to the liberal neutrality of the state schools. Kuyper's Free University was a practical example of this, offering an alternative to the state-controlled higher education system. But the church was another critical area, where Kuyper's ideas were put to the test. The Dutch Reformed Church, also known as the NHK, was deeply entrenched in the liberal political order of the Netherlands. Kuyper saw this as a compromise of Christian orthodoxy. In 1882, he was appointed as an elder in Amsterdam, which gave him a platform to address the issues within the church. He organized meetings and conferences to discuss the problems and to plan a course of action. One of the main issues was the state church's formula of subscription, which required ministers to vow to promote the interests of the state church rather than to adhere to the historic Reformed confessions. Kuyper and his followers, known as the Dolentie, or grieving churches, sought to reform the state church from within. They made changes to the church order in Amsterdam to assert their independence. But this led to a conflict with higher church authorities. In 1886, the Classical Board suspended Kuyper and other conservative leaders, and the National Synod ratified this decision. Kuyper was deposed, but he and his followers did not immediately secede from the state church. They still considered themselves part of the NHK and hoped to restore its orthodoxy. However, the legal battle over property rights and stipends eventually forced the Dolentie to form a separate denomination. By 1888, the Dolentie churches numbered about 100,000 members in 200 congregations. Kuyper and his followers then began to explore a merger with the Christelijke Gereformeerde Kerk, CGK, a church that had already seceded from the state church in 1834. Despite shared theological beliefs, there were significant differences between the two groups. The CGK had a longer history and was wary of losing its identity and influence. There were also concerns about the Dolentie's more democratic approach to church governance and their perceived lack of strictness in doctrine. Despite these challenges, the two groups eventually merged in 1892, forming the Gereformeerde Kerken in Nenrud, GKN. This new church became a significant force in Dutch Reformed Protestantism, bringing together diverse strands of conservatism under one umbrella. Kuyper's political career also played a crucial role in his legacy. In 1901, he became the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, leading a coalition that included Roman Catholics. This alliance was based on shared principles of pluralism and the recognition of the importance of families, schools, and voluntary associations. Kuyper's political success was a testament to his ability to navigate the complex landscape of Dutch society, balancing Reformed principles with the realities of a diverse and modern nation. Kuyper's influence extended beyond the Netherlands, particularly to South Africa. The Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa faced similar challenges as the NHK, with the British taking control of the Cape Colony in the early 19th century. This led to the establishment of new Reformed churches outside the original colony, reflecting the complex relationship between Dutch and English influences in the region. Kuyper's ideas of sphere sovereignty and the importance of Reformed institutions resonated with these new churches, contributing to the development of a robust Reformed presence in South Africa. Kuyper's life and work were marked by a tireless effort to apply Reformed principles to every aspect of society, from politics and education to the church itself. His legacy continues to influence Reformed thought and practice around the world. The Afrikaner farmers or Boers were descendants of early colonists from countries like the Netherlands, France, Germany, Scandinavia, and Scotland. They felt uncomfortable under British rule, especially after slavery was abolished. In response, they decided to move away from British control and preserve their way of life, which included a strict separation between white and black people. This move, known as the Great Trek, saw about 10,000 Afrikaners and their servants travel into the interior of South Africa. By the 1850s, they had formed two new independent states, the Transvaal, also called the South African Republic, and the Orange Free State. The Dutch Reformed Church in the Cape Colony did not support this migration or the Boers' desire to set up new churches. However, the Boers went ahead and established their own religious institutions. In 1855, they created the Nederduitse Hervormde Kerk Dutch Reformed Church in the Transvaal, which became the state church of the South African Republic. A few years later, in 1859, a disagreement over hymns led to the formation of a stricter church, the Gereformeerde Kerk in Suid-Afrika. Reformed Church in South Africa. These new churches in Africa were different from the churches in the Netherlands. Even though they looked to the Netherlands for ministers and theological training, their creation was driven by political reasons rather than religious ones. The political struggles between the Dutch and the British in South Africa, especially the two Boer Wars, brought the Dutch in Europe and Africa closer together. The First Boer War, 1880 to 1881, was about the Boers' fight for independence after the British annexed the Transvaal. A peace treaty gave the Boers some autonomy, but tensions remained. The discovery of diamond mines in the Transvaal led to the Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, which ended with the British victory and the end of the Boer republics. During this time, the Dutch politician and theologian Abraham Kuyper, who later became the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, supported the Boers. In 1899, he wrote an article defending the Boers' resistance against British imperialism. In 1901, he traveled to London to try to mediate between the British and the Boers. Kuyper's ideas, especially his concept of sphere sovereignty, which means that different parts of society, like family, church, and state, should operate independently, became popular among the Afrikaners. They used these ideas to justify their separation from the British and later to support apartheid, the system of racial segregation in South Africa. Kuyper's influence also spread to North America. In 1846, a Dutch immigrant named Albertus van Raalte led a group of Dutch settlers to Michigan, where they founded a colony called Holland. Van Raalte was part of the Afscheiding, a group that had separated from the Dutch state church. By 1848, he had established a classis, a regional church council, with 9 congregations, 6 ministers, and about 1,000 members. The Dutch settlers in America sought support from other Dutch Americans, both financially and religiously. This led to a union with the Reformed Protestant Dutch Church, later called the Reformed Church in America, or RCA. However, this union did not last long. Differences in church practices, especially over hymns and the importance of Christian schools, caused a split. In 1857, a group of Van Raalte's followers left the RCA to form the Christian Reformed Church, CRC. The CRC remained small and isolated, with strong ties to the Netherlands and a focus on maintaining Dutch and Reformed traditions. Between 1885 and 1895, the CRC's membership grew significantly, partly due to new immigrants from the Netherlands and disagreements with the RCA over issues like membership in the Freemasons. The CRC's growth prompted them to address the challenge of assimilating into American society. Kuyper's neo-Calvinist ideas, which emphasized a reformed worldview and the importance of Christian education, helped the CRC find its place in America. However, these ideas also led to internal debates. In 1920, a professor at the CRC's Calvin Seminary, Roloff Jansen, was criticized for his views on the Hebrew Scriptures and the concept of common grace. The CRC Synod of 1922 deposed Jansen, and the debate over common grace continued. One of the most vocal critics was Herman Hoeksma, who argued that Kuyper's idea of common grace threatened the uniqueness of salvation. In 1924, the CRC's Synod affirmed a limited version of common grace, but also condemned worldliness and prohibited activities like dancing and gambling. Hoeksma and his supporters were eventually deposed, leading to the formation of the Protestant Reformed Church in 1925. In the Netherlands, Kuyper's death in 1920 left a void in the Gereformeerde Kerken in Nenoord and GKN. The younger generation found Kuyper's ideas outdated compared to the work of Karl Barth. The GKN also faced internal theological disagreements, such as the debate over presumptive regeneration and the use of higher criticism in biblical studies. Klaas Schilder. a prominent critic of these issues, was an outspoken opponent of National Socialism during World War II. His resistance to the Nazis, including his imprisonment and time in hiding, made him a significant figure in the GKN and added another layer to the legacy of Kuyper's neo-Calvinist coalition. In the 1940s, a Dutch minister named Scholte faced a tough situation. The 1942 GKN Synod, a big meeting of church leaders, made a decision about baptism and regeneration that Scholte strongly disagreed with. He found out about this decision indirectly, which made him feel even more upset. Scholte wrote to the church authorities, saying he couldn't accept their decision. 2 years later, the synod decided to remove him from his position, saying he was being disobedient and causing division. Feeling isolated, Scholte met with other ministers, church members, and seminarians in The Hague. They decided to break away from the GKN and form their own church called the Gereformeerde Kerken in Nenwerd, Vrijgemeede, or the Liberated Reformed Churches in the Netherlands. This new church grew quickly, from a small group to over 200 churches, with 77,000 members in just 2 years. This movement was part of a larger trend in the Netherlands. Abraham Kuyper, a prominent Dutch theologian and politician, had worked hard to bring together different Reformed groups. Unlike in Scotland, where conservative Presbyterians were united under the Church of Scotland, the Netherlands had a more complex religious landscape. Kuyper aimed to create a strong, unified Reformed presence that could influence both church and society. He wanted the church to be free from government control, but also to have a significant role in public life. However, Kuyper's vision was not easy to achieve. The Dutch Reformed community had many different theological and political views, making it hard to keep everyone together. Despite these challenges, Kuyper's efforts showed that it was possible to build a strong, independent Reformed church. In the United States, Presbyterians had a different set of challenges. Unlike in the Netherlands, there was no established Presbyterian church in the early United States. The Constitution and the Presbyterian Church's revised beliefs allowed for more freedom. Some Presbyterians, like the Covenanters, were unhappy with the new government because it didn't acknowledge Christ's authority. However, most Presbyterians were comfortable with the new political system and saw it as a chance to build a strong Reformed church. The Presbyterian Church in the USA, PCUSA, revised its beliefs to fit the new political reality. They changed the part about the government's role in protecting the true church, making it more inclusive. This change allowed Presbyterians to work with other Protestants to build a better society. They joined forces with Congregationalists to plant churches in the Northwest Territory and participated in the Benevolent Empire, a network of religious and social organizations that aimed to improve moral and social conditions. By the mid-1800s, some Presbyterians started to question the methods and goals of the Second Great Awakening, a period of religious revival. These old-school Presbyterians believed in strict adherence to the Westminster Confession and a more formal church structure. They disagreed with the New School Presbyterians, who were more open to working with other denominations and focused on social reform. The Old School Presbyterians eventually broke away from the New School, leading to a significant split in the church. This split was partly about theology, but it was also about how the church should be organized and what its role should be in society. The Old School believed the church's primary mission was spiritual, while the New School saw it as a force for social change. The split between Old and New School Presbyterians was not just theological, it was also regional. The Civil War further divided the church, with Northern and Southern Presbyterians forming separate communions. After the war, there was a push for reunification. Southern Presbyterians merged their Old and New School branches in 1867, and Northern Presbyterians followed suit in 1869. The reunions were partly driven by the desire to support national unity and address the social and religious challenges of the time. The reunification of Presbyterians in the United States was seen as a way to strengthen the church and help solve the country's problems. Leaders believed that a united Presbyterian church could play a crucial role in building a free and Christian society. They also joined forces with other Protestants through organizations like the Evangelical Alliance, which aimed to combat threats to Christian values, such as materialism, infidelity, and Roman Catholicism. The story of Scholte and the Dutch Reformed Church, and the splits and reunions in the American Presbyterian Church show how religious movements can be shaped by both internal beliefs and external pressures. Whether in the Netherlands or the United States, the struggle to maintain a clear purpose while adapting to changing times is a common theme in the history of Reformed Protestantism. The early 1900s were a time of great change for Presbyterians in the United States. They faced new ideas in science and theology that challenged their traditional beliefs. At the same time, they were trying to work together with other Protestant churches to make a stronger, more united Christian presence in America. In the South, a professor named James Woodrow, who was the uncle of future President Woodrow Wilson, taught at Columbia Seminary. He tried to show that the theory of evolution, which was a new idea at the time, could fit with the Bible's creation story. Many people in the church didn't like this idea. They believed that God created Adam directly, not through a process of evolution. In 1886, the church voted to say that Adam was not descended from animals, but was created directly by God. In the North, another professor, Charles A. Briggs, taught at Union Seminary. Briggs said that the Bible wasn't perfect and that people should use reason to understand it. This was a big problem for many Presbyterians who believed the Bible was without error. A theologian named Benjamin B. Warfield argued that the Bible was both divine and human, which made it authoritative and understandable. In 1892, the church said that the Bible was inerrant, and a year later, they dismissed Briggs from his job. Some Presbyterians, like Warfield, didn't like the idea of working with other churches because they thought it would water down their beliefs. But others, like Philip Schaff, wanted to bring different churches together. Schaff helped create the Presbyterian Alliance in 1877, which was a group that aimed to unite Presbyterian churches. In 1906, the Presbyterian Church in the United States, PCUSA, and the Cumberland Presbyterian Church merged. The Cumberland Church had started in 1810 because they didn't agree with some of the strict beliefs of the PCUSA. To make the merger possible, the PCUSA changed some of its beliefs to be more welcoming. The biggest step toward uniting Protestant churches came in 1908 with the formation of the Federal Council of Churches. This council brought together about 30 different denominations to work on social issues and promote the well-being of the nation. The first meeting was in Philadelphia, and it was a big deal. The speakers talked about how the churches could work together to make America a better place. One of the main issues the council addressed was the conflict between big businesses and workers. They wanted to find ways to help workers and make sure everyone was treated fairly. They also talked about the importance of having a day off each week for rest and worship. During this time, a man named J. Gresham Machen became a key figure in the Presbyterian Church. He taught at Princeton Theological Seminary and was known for his strong beliefs. In 1922, a Baptist minister named Harry Emerson Fosdick gave a sermon that upset many Presbyterians. Fosdick said that some traditional beliefs, like the inerrancy of the Bible, weren't as important as solving big problems like world peace. This caused a lot of debate, and Fosdick eventually had to leave his position at a Presbyterian church. Machen wrote a book called Christianity and Liberalism in 1923, where he argued that liberalism was a different religion from Christianity. He believed that if the church wanted to work with other churches, it had to stick to its traditional beliefs. Machen's book became very popular and helped fuel the debate within the Presbyterian Church. Another important figure was William Jennings Bryan, a famous Presbyterian who ran for president 3 times. He was also involved in the Scopes trial, where a teacher was convicted for teaching evolution in a public school. Bryan and others wanted to make sure that Presbyterians didn't accept ideas like evolution. The debate over these issues continued throughout the 1920s. The Presbytery of New York ordained 2 men who didn't believe in the virgin birth of Christ, which caused more controversy. This made it clear that the Presbyterian Church was divided over its beliefs and its role in society. Despite the challenges, the Presbyterian Church and other Protestant churches continued to work on finding ways to cooperate and make a positive impact on the nation. The year was 1923, and the Presbyterian Church in the United States was in the midst of a heated debate. The General Assembly, the highest governing body of the church, had been insisting for decades that certain doctrines, including the virgin birth of Jesus, were essential to the faith. This stance had been reaffirmed in 1892, 1910, and 1916, and the Assembly was not about to back down. However, this insistence put the church on a collision course with the Presbytery of New York City and the Synod of New York, which were more progressive and wealthy sectors of the denomination. In response to the growing tension, a document called the Auburn Affirmation was circulated in 1923, written by ministers and faculty from the Synod of New York. It called for tolerance and charity within the church, allowing for a variety of interpretations of the faith. This document highlighted the deepening divide between conservatives and liberals. The conflict came to a head in 1925 when the General Assembly met again. Charles R. Rudman, a professor at Princeton Seminary, was chosen as the moderator. Ardman was an evangelical who believed in the fundamentals of the faith, but was also committed to keeping the church united. When the Assembly voted to reaffirm the virgin birth as an essential doctrine, Erdman tried to mediate the situation. He established a committee, the Special Commission of 1925, to investigate the controversy and recommend a course of action. The Special Commission worked hard over the next year, interviewing prominent figures from both sides. They heard from conservatives like J. Gresham Machen and Clarence Macartney, and from liberals like Henry Sloane Coffin and William Adams Brown. The committee's report, presented in 2 parts in 1926, blamed conservatives more than liberals for the controversy. They criticized the harsh and unfair statements made by conservatives and called for an end to slander and misrepresentation. The committee also emphasized the importance of unity and cooperation for the church's mission. However, the committee's recommendations were a threat to conservatives. They suggested that the church should avoid making hasty or harsh judgments about the motives of others. The committee also wanted the church to focus on global outreach, seeing the United States as a resourceful nation that could help spread the gospel around the world. The Presbyterian Church's strong identification with American values was evident in its support for prohibition. Even after the death of William Jennings Bryan, a prominent supporter of prohibition, the church continued to pass resolutions against alcohol. In 1926, the Presbytery of New Brunswick, where Machen was a member, passed a motion supporting prohibition. Machen voted against it, believing that the church should focus only on matters revealed in Scripture. This stance cost him a promotion to a new chair at Princeton Seminary, as some commissioners questioned his moral judgment. The decision to delay Macon's promotion was not just about prohibition. It was also a result of political maneuvering at Princeton Seminary, which was a key institution in the Presbyterian Church. Conservatives saw Princeton as the last bastion of traditional theology, while liberals wanted to move it toward greater unity and progress. The 1926 Assembly approved a committee to investigate differences among the faculty at Princeton, leading to an administrative overhaul in 1929 that increased the president's power and diluted the influence of the conservative board of directors. Frustrated by these changes, Macon decided to start an independent seminary. He had the means and a following among conservative Presbyterians, and in 1929, Westminster Theological Seminary was born in Philadelphia. Macon's goal was to continue the tradition of Princeton's commitment to the Word of God, free from the influence of modern liberalism. The conflict within the Presbyterian Church continued to escalate. In 1932, a report called Rethinking Missions was published, questioning the traditional motives for foreign missions. The report, co-sponsored by major Protestant denominations, suggested that missions should focus on building a better world through education, economic development, and medical aid, rather than saving sinners from eternal damnation. This view was welcomed by some, including Pearls S. Buck, a famous author and daughter of Presbyterian missionaries. However, it was strongly opposed by conservatives like Macon, who saw it as a threat to the church's mission. Machen drafted an overture calling for reform of the church's Board of Foreign Missions, but when the General Assembly rejected it, he took matters into his own hands. In 1933, he created the Independent Board for Presbyterian Foreign Missions. This move was seen as a violation of church law, and Machen was brought to trial in 1935. Despite a fair hearing, he was found guilty of violating his ordination vows and defying church authority. The trial and the creation of the Independent Board caused divisions among conservatives. Some, like Clarence Macartney, believed that the new agency was inflammatory and was hindering the seminary's ability to produce conservative pastors. Macartney and others resigned from the Board of Trustees, leaving Macon with a smaller group of supporters. In 1936, Macon and his followers formed a new denomination, the Presbyterian Church of America, PCA. The first General Assembly of the PCA met in Philadelphia, and Machen was elected as the first moderator. However, the new denomination faced challenges from the start. Machen died shortly after the First Assembly, and Carl McIntyre, another prominent conservative, left to form his own denomination. The Presbyterian Church, USA, also brought a civil suit over the PCA's name, further complicating the situation. Despite these challenges, the PCA continued to grow and became a significant voice for conservative Presbyterianism in the United States. The legacy of J. Gresham Machen and the conflicts of the 1920s and 1930s shaped the future of American Presbyterianism, leaving a lasting impact on the church and its mission. J. Gresham Machen's premature death on January 1, 1937, left the Presbyterian Church of America, PCA, without its most influential leader. Machen had been traveling to speak to a group of conservatives in North Dakota during the week after Christmas in 1936, when he caught a cold that turned into pneumonia. His death was a significant loss, but the tensions within the conservative Presbyterian community were already mounting. Just a few months earlier, a conflict had erupted when Clarence McIntyre orchestrated a takeover of the Independent Board for Foreign Missions, ousting Macon as president. This betrayal deeply affected Machen and highlighted the growing divisions among conservatives. One of the main issues that drove a wedge between these conservative groups was their stance on alcohol. McIntyre's faction proposed a church policy supporting prohibition, which was rejected by the majority, including the faculty at Westminster Theological Seminary. The Westminster faculty, many of whom were from Reformed backgrounds where drinking alcohol was common, argued for Christian liberty. This debate was particularly significant because, for many American Presbyterians, total abstinence from alcohol had become a norm. When McIntyre complained about the direction of the PCA under the influence of hyphenated Americans at Westminster, he was essentially criticizing the church for not being truly American. The leaders at Westminster, such as Cornelius Van Til and John Murray, were from Dutch and Scottish backgrounds, and their theology and piety were different from what many American Presbyterians were used to. The Presbyterian Church USA, PCUSA, also filed a civil suit against the PCA on August 13, 1936, arguing that the PCA's name was too similar to the PCUSA and would confuse the public. The PCA argued that the PCUSA did not have a monopoly on the word Presbyterian, and that the publicity surrounding Mackin and the Presbyterian controversy would prevent confusion. However, the judge ruled against the PCA on June 27, 1938, stating that the PCA's name was confusing and would harm the PCUSA's work. As a result, the PCA changed its name to the Orthodox Presbyterian Church in 1940. Moshen's opposition to the drift of American Presbyterianism was rooted in his belief in the spirituality of the church. He argued that the church's mission was spiritual, not political or social. In 1933, Macon addressed a gathering of political and social scientists, emphasizing that the church's role was to bring the gospel to people's hearts, not to engage in political activism. This view was a departure from the prevailing idea among American Protestants that the church should be involved in social and political issues. Mochen's stance was a call for a version of Reformed Protestantism that was true to its roots and free from the influence of national destiny. Mochen's influence extended beyond the United States. In 1926, he received an invitation to become the principal of Knox College, a Presbyterian theological school in Toronto, Canada. This invitation was a recognition of his reputation as a defender of conservative theology. The Canadian Presbyterians were facing their own struggles, particularly over the issue of church union. In 1925, the United Church of Canada was formed, absorbing many Presbyterian congregations. Those who opposed the union, including conservatives, continued to maintain the Presbyterian Church in Canada, though it was significantly smaller. Machen's nomination to lead Knox College reflected the affinity between conservatives in the United States and Canada. In Northern Ireland, Machen's visit in 1927 was a source of inspiration for conservatives who were concerned about the rise of liberal theology in the Irish Presbyterian Church. He delivered lectures and preached to large crowds, but his efforts could not prevent the acquittal of James Ernest Davy, a professor accused of questioning the infallibility of Scripture. This outcome highlighted the limited impact of Macon's influence and the challenges faced by conservative Presbyterians in Ireland. Mochen's influence also reached Korea, where he inspired Hyung Nong Park, a Korean Presbyterian minister. Park studied at Princeton Seminary and later returned to Korea to teach at Pyongyang Theological Seminary. He opposed liberal theological trends, particularly critical readings of Genesis and efforts to ordain women. Park's stance earned him the nickname the Machin of Korea. During the Japanese occupation, Park's school was closed, and he went into exile in Manchuria. After the war, he returned to South Korea to continue his work training ministers. Mochen's legacy as a defender of conservative Presbyterianism and his influence on other parts of the world demonstrate the enduring impact of his ideas and the challenges faced by those who sought to maintain traditional Reformed theology in the face of modernism and ecumenism. The story of the German Reformed Church is a tale of change, struggle, and transformation. In the early 20th century, as Europe was reeling from the devastation of World War I, a young Swiss pastor named Karl Barth published a groundbreaking commentary on the Book of Romans. This work, which initially struggled to find a publisher, would go on to reshape Protestant theology and inspire a generation of Christians to rethink their faith. Barth's ideas were radical. He argued that the Bible revealed a world not of human history or morality, but of divine truth. God's kingdom, Barth insisted, was entirely separate from the affairs of nations and the progress of civilizations. This perspective was a breath of fresh air for many who felt that the church had become too entangled with political and social agendas. Barth's emphasis on the transcendence of God and the otherworldly nature of the kingdom of God resonated deeply with those seeking a more authentic and distinct Christian identity. At the same time, German Protestants were grappling with the collapse of the old order. The Weimar Republic, which replaced the German Empire, brought with it a new political landscape that left the churches feeling uncertain and vulnerable. The old ties between the church, the state, and the monarchy were severed, and the new democratic government offered both challenges and opportunities. Some church leaders saw the chance to revitalize the church by making it more responsive to the people, while others worried about the loss of state support and the rise of secularism. Karl Barth, with his emphasis on the church's spiritual independence, became a guiding light for many during this turbulent period. His theology, which stressed the separation of the church from political and cultural affairs, offered a way for the church to maintain its distinct identity and mission. This was particularly important as the rise of the National Socialist Nazi regime in 1933 threatened to subjugate the church to the state's agenda. Barth and other German Protestants, such as those in the Confessing Church, stood firm in their opposition to the Nazi regime, emphasizing the church's duty to remain faithful to God's word rather than to political ideology. The legacy of Barth's ideas extended far beyond Germany. His emphasis on the church's spiritual nature and its independence from worldly concerns influenced Reformed Protestants around the world. In Korea, for example, a pastor named Park played a crucial role in the divisions within the Presbyterian Church. Park, like Barth, was concerned with the church's purity and opposed to liberal Protestantism and ecumenical movements that he saw as compromising the faith. His efforts to establish a conservative seminary and join the International Council of Christian Churches reflected his commitment to maintaining a distinct and orthodox Christian identity. In Canada and Ireland, the doctrine of the spirituality of the church, while not as central as it was for Barth and his followers, still played a role in shaping the way Reformed Protestants understood their relationship to the world. The idea that the church's primary mission was to proclaim the gospel and maintain the purity of its teachings, rather than to engage in social and political activism, was a common thread among Reformed thinkers. The story of the German Reformed Church, from the early 20th century to the rise of the Confessing Church and beyond, is a story of a community striving to remain faithful to its core beliefs in the face of significant challenges. It is a story of resilience, of the enduring power of faith, and of the ongoing quest to understand what it means to be the church in a world that is constantly changing. As we look back on this history, we are reminded that the church's strength lies in its commitment to the Word of God and its willingness to stand apart from the world when necessary. The lessons learned from this period continue to resonate with Christians today, offering a model of faithfulness and a call to remain true to the gospel in an ever-changing world.